Good evening and welcome to NAMI New Jersey's webinar series. My name is Elena Kravitz. I am the Hearts and Minds Program Coordinator for NAMI New Jersey. Hearts and Minds program seeks to raise awareness and provide information on inner and outer wellness for those living with psychiatric disabilities and challenges, including healthy living. Today's topic for Hearts and Minds is nutrition and mental wellness. We are honored tonight to have our distinguished speaker, Rebecca Howard, joining us. Rebecca is a second-year medical student at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School in Piscataway, New Jersey. Rebecca has been volunteering with NAMI New Jersey for the summer, fostering her interest in the intersection of community and mental health. After graduating from Carnegie Mellon University with a BS in Neuroscience in 2017, Rebecca spent 2 years working at the National Institutes of Health at the and at the National Institute of Diabetes, Digestive, and Kidney Diseases. There she worked on clinical studies investigating how different diets contribute to weight regulation and metabolism, as well as the effects of food on neurological pathways. Her background in clinical nutrition research has inspired her to continue, has inspired her to continue to pursue this passion throughout medical school as she plans to incorporate nutrition counseling into her future work as a physician. Rebecca, we are grateful you are here and look forward to your presentation. I would now like to introduce to you Rebecca Howard. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction, Elena. That was great. As she mentioned, my topic today for the presentation is nutrition and mental wellness, how food affects the brain. And I am a second-year medical student at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School in Piscataway, New Jersey. So just an outline of what I'm going to be covering in my presentation today. I will start by going over the gut-brain axis and talking a little bit about how your digestive system and your brain are connected. Next, I will be going into a little bit about fiber and how this can impact inflammation in your body and how then that inflammation can go on to affect your brain. Next, I will be talking about some very important neurotransmitters, and particularly the amino acids that are used to make those neurotransmitters. So I'm going to be focusing on tryptophan and tyrosine in particular. After that, I will be discussing micronutrients for brain functioning, and I've decided to focus today on the omega-3 and 6 fatty acids, and also vitamins B9 and B12. After that, I will go over macronutrients for brain functioning, so talking a little bit about carbohydrates and why they're important, and also mentioning the Mediterranean diet and some of the research that has shown how the Mediterranean diet can help brain health. And finally, I will be discussing nutrition at the grocery store, so some of the common food swaps that you could make to improve your diet, bringing in what I've talked about throughout my presentation, and then talking a little bit about frozen foods and some of the benefits of those. So I just wanted to go over a little bit what I mean by a nutritional approach to mental health. And I thought this diagram was a great way to kind of put it all together. So aside from all the biology of what's going on in your brain, there's so many different things in your environment that impact your mental health as well. So things like triggers such as substance abuse, then also genetic predisposition and environmental factors like the exposure to trauma you have throughout your life. But then I've highlighted the things that I'm going to be talking about in my presentation. So namely poor nutritional intake or good nutritional intake, which I'm going to be discussing. And I added an arrow down to inflammation because that's something I'm going to be focusing on in my presentation, talking about how nutritional intake can impact inflammation and those together can impact mental health. So the composition, structure, and function of your brain depends on the availability of the nutrients that you have, such as fats, amino acids, vitamins, and minerals. And so the food intake and quality of your diet impacts your brain functioning. And diet is a modifiable variable to target your mental health, mood, and cognitive performance. As well as this, your gut hormones and your neurotransmitters and your microbiota. I'll define some of these terms in the next slide. These are all affected by your diet composition. So this is really something that you have control over, which I think is great. And it's something that has a direct effect on various aspects of your mental health and cognition. So just some definitions I wanted to touch on before I move forward. These are going to be things that I come back to a lot throughout my presentation, so I'll try to keep refreshing you as to what they mean in case you're not familiar. But we'll start with fatty acids. So that's a chain of carbon and hydrogens that make up what is typically referred to as a fat or an oil, and they can be saturated or unsaturated. And unsaturated fats tend to be from plant sources, and then saturated tends to be from animal sources. So you can see in the picture at the top, the saturated fats have a long line of carbons. There's no, they're all single bonds. And then in the unsaturated fatty acid, there's that double bond that you can see. So it kind of kinks it a little bit. And it just means that the fats can't be packed in as carefully next to each other, and they don't solidify as much. So it's just, I guess your body can break it down a little bit easier, and unsaturated fats tend to be healthier fats, and you've probably heard of saturated fats as something that you should avoid in your diet because they have been shown to lead to all sorts of diseases. Next, talking about amino acids. So I'm going to bring up those a little bit later, but basically they're the building blocks of proteins. So your proteins that you ingest are made up of a lot of different amino acids, and there's a bunch of different types, but the human body needs 20 of these in order to survive and to make the proteins that it uses to function. And 9 of these are actually essential, which just means that your body can't make them, and it needs to get them from your diet. So those ones are particularly important to make sure you're getting in your diet, because without that, your body can't make these really important molecules. So for the neurotransmitter, this is a chemical substance that's released between the neurons in your brain and nervous system, and these are just the cells that make up your nervous system. So these act as signaling molecules and basically are conveying messages between the cells in your brain and your nervous system. So they're really important molecules, and something that we definitely need and is made from a lot of the components of our diets. Microbiome refers to the collection of bacteria, viruses, and fungi that live within and on the human body. So this may be something you've heard of, like the gut microbiome. That's basically all the bacteria that live in your digestive system. And it's something that you can't see, but there's so many of them that it basically constitutes its own organ. And they have a variety of functions. They're really important. And major groups of them are conserved like between people, but it's something that there's a lot of variation between individuals based on what you're eating. And when you analyze people's microbiome, you can kind of tell like what's been in their environment, what diet they've been on. So it's a really fascinating area of research, and it's really important to consider when you're thinking about the diet that you're eating. Cytokines are proteins that are used in cell signaling, and particularly within the immune system. So it's how the immune system communicates what's going on all over your body, whether there's like an inflammatory process somewhere. It's how you are basically figuring that out, coordinating all the different systems. And then adipokines are cytokines that are secreted by fat cells or adipose tissue. So I'm going to reference adiponectin in some slides of my presentation. So that's just a signaling molecule that's used by the immune system, but it is related to fat cells. And then finally, oxidative stress. This is an imbalance between reactive oxygen species that are produced by the body and then the amount that they're being detoxified. So there's a variety of biological mechanisms taking place within you, and you're producing these toxic byproducts that then need to be neutralized. And there's certain foods that can do this called antioxidants. And basically, if this balance gets out of whack, you end up with too many of these toxic byproducts and not enough that are being neutralized, and that kind of tips the balance towards a state of inflammation or this like pro-oxidative state. So this is a table I found in one of the papers I looked at that I thought was a great summary of some of the proposed causes and treatments for common mental health disorders. So in that second column, you can see the proposed cause for the disorder from the paper that they were looking at. And then the treatment column is a nutritional supplement that could be used to alleviate the symptoms based on the study that took place. So I've highlighted the ones that I'm going to be referencing throughout my presentation, and I kind of use this to focus in on what I thought was most relevant. But this one's for major depression, and then we have bipolar disorder, and finally schizophrenia. And they had a lot more as well, but I focused on these just to highlight the ones that I'm going to be discussing throughout my presentation. So tryptophan, tyrosine, omega-3s, folate, and vitamin B. These come up again and again in the literature, and they're really linked to a variety of mental health conditions. So just starting with the gut-brain axis. As I mentioned, the gut microbiome is a key mediating pathway for processes of inflammation, oxidative stress, which I defined as the production of toxic byproducts that can't be neutralized, and then neuroplasticity, which just means the ability of the brain to change over time. And this is a good process. It's something that we want to happen, and it's something that the gut microbiome can help as we age, helping us to keep that neuroplasticity up. So the gut is the largest immune and endocrine organ, and this just means that 70 to 80% of our immune cells actually lie in our gut, and it's also a major source of serotonin and dopamine. So everything that you're putting into your body and you're eating in your diet is going to have an impact on your immune cells and your hormones that are being produced, as well as your neurotransmitters. So it's something to consider. It's not just separate systems going on in your body, like everything's connected, and your nutrition has such a huge impact on that. So your diet is a modifiable risk factor for mental illness, and it's one of the things we do have control over and that we can alter as a form of preventive care. So that's why I love looking at nutrition, because I think it's a great way that people can, it's something that you have control over, and it's the more that you know about it, hopefully the more it can inspire you to try and eat a little bit better. And dietary patterns can affect our mental illness through pathways that are independent of weight status. And I think this is important because I want to move away from the idea that weight regulation is the only thing we should be focusing on. Definitely a good piece of our health, but you can be the perfect weight that you want to be and still have a lot of chronic inflammation and other things from having an unhealthy diet. And that's something to consider, that it's not necessarily always going to be dependent on how much weight you're gaining or losing. It can be a very separate process, and it's important to think about it outside of the realm of just how much you weigh at the moment. I also wanted to talk about the leaky gut. So this is something you may have heard of, that basically just means changes in intestinal permeability, which can happen through a high-fat diet sometimes. And this allows bacterial toxins called lipo-oligosaccharides to activate the immune cells in your intestinal wall. So like I said, there's a huge number of immune cells in your gut, and if your intestines are more permeable and allow more things through, your immune system kind of gets constantly activated, and it leads to this elevated systemic inflammation. And you may have heard of low-grade chronic inflammation. It's a similar thing. It's basically just a long-term constant activation of your immune system at a low level, but it's all over your body. So it impacts all sorts of things, including your brain, which I'll get to later. And then these inflammatory cytokines, which are these signaling molecules, they also activate the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which mediates your stress response. So things that you're eating could be causing this inflammation, which then is going on to activate your stress response and causing your body to be in this constant state of stress and anxiety, which is manifesting in your mood and how you're feeling. And it could all come down to what you're eating and what you're giving your body. So I think that's a really fascinating link between the two. So I'll briefly go over two of the main neurotransmitters I'll be discussing today and what areas of the brain they mostly affect. So as I mentioned, neurotransmitters are the molecules that your brain uses to communicate and send signals, and they're synthesized by your body from the foods you eat, which is why nutrition is so important. And they can also be delivered pharmaceutically in the form of drugs, but definitely something that nutrition has a huge impact on. So starting with dopamine, these projections go to an area called the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens, which are both involved with pleasure and reward. And then they also go up to the frontal cortex, which affects your cognition and your ability to make decisions. Dopamine has a huge range of other functions that I won't go into, including motor movements, metabolism, the immune system. So being able to synthesize enough of this neurotransmitter is really important for your brain and mental health. And then serotonin is another really important neurotransmitter. As you can see, it has pathways all over the brain. It's really widespread, but some of the main functions it has are to regulate your mood, deal with your ability to create and process memories, your cognition, and then also sleep, because melatonin is produced from serotonin, and melatonin is the main chemical that's involved in sleep regulation, which you may have heard of. So really important functions here in terms of mood, basic cognitive functioning. These neurotransmitters both do a lot all over the brain. So fiber is my next topic. Fiber is really underrated. I think it's so important, and I hope I can convince you why. So fiber is the component of food that isn't broken down by your body. It travels through your whole gastrointestinal tract, and it provides benefits along the way. Most people, when they think of fiber, just think of the insoluble fiber, and this is the one that doesn't dissolve in water. It helps with movement of materials through your digestive tract, and that's pretty much all it serves a purpose for, which is important. But then there's also different types of fiber, such as soluble fiber, and this dissolves in water. It still isn't absorbed, it isn't broken down by your body, but it absorbs water into it, and it has positive effects on your cholesterol levels. It slows glucose absorption to allow better control of blood glucose levels by not letting as much glucose into your system as quickly as you would without it. And so it has a huge role to play throughout your body. And it's not just, fiber isn't just about bulk and movement of food. It has so many other roles. So I have some examples on the right of soluble and insoluble fiber. As you can see, fruits and veg in both categories, but for soluble, it tends to be apples have a type of soluble fiber, and then berries. So those are the main fruits that you want to include in your diet as well. And then also beans, seeds, nuts, oats are all soluble. And then insoluble you find in pretty much all whole grains, and then a lot of fruits and veggies. So all important. The important part though of fiber is that it plays a role in inflammation, and it actually affects your microbiome composition. So the microbes, the bacteria in your gut, they ferment the fiber to produce these things called short chain fatty acids. And these short chain fatty acids are really beneficial. They regulate all forms of your metabolism. They impact brain development by increasing tryptophan and energy. I'll show this pathway in a couple slides. And they're known to have a really positive impact on immune functioning. So super important. And it's the soluble fiber is basically able to be fermented, as I mentioned, by your gut bacteria. So that's why you need the soluble as well as the insoluble. Okay, so then if you look at markers of inflammation with high and low fiber diets, studies have shown that you actually have lower levels of markers of inflammation with a high fiber diet. So your system is less inflamed. And something called C-reactive protein, we see that levels of that go down, and cytokines such as interleukin-6. So this is just measuring your inflammation in your body, and there's lower concentrations with a high fiber diet. So that's just important to note that you're decreasing that systemic inflammation that I brought up previously that comes from things such as a leaky gut. Then there are anti-inflammatory cytokines like adipokine, and these actually increase with higher dietary fiber. So you're decreasing the inflammatory molecules and you're increasing the anti-inflammatory molecules, which overall is just decreasing inflammation in general. So adiponectin Adiponectin is an adipokine, and it increases with higher dietary fiber. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was that if you substitute refined wheat with whole grain wheat, this is something that also lowers inflammation. So whole grain wheats are always going to have more fiber in them than refined wheats. Refined wheats tend to take out a lot of the fiber, so keeping as many whole grain foods in your diet as possible is going to increase those beneficial fiber components. And they found that substituting one for the other in this study with overweight and obese adults actually lowered inflammation overall due to the increased fiber. And whole grain foods are really rich in phytochemicals, which basically is something that protects against oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is a consequence of inflammation and a feature of depressive symptoms. So being able to decrease these with whole grain foods is really important. And I just also wanted to mention that fiber definitely has a direct effect on these things, but it's also correlated with just increased beneficial nutrients and higher quality foods overall. So if you're eating a high fiber diet, you tend to get just a better diet in quality, and you're going to receive a lot of other benefits from other parts of the diet as well. So it's not 100% due to the fiber, but it definitely helps if you're focusing on achieving high fiber foods in your diet. That's going to help with the quality of your diet overall, which is great. And also it's way more satiating, so you're going to stay full for longer, and that causes a lower calorie intake, which has benefits as well. So moving on to inflammation in the brain, kind of linking this with the fiber as well. So the fiber and the link to inflammation, going on to see how that could affect all sorts of processes in the brain. So depression is frequently comorbid with inflammatory conditions. That just means they occur at the same time. And these are things such as metabolic syndrome, and they're thought to have a shared biological mechanism. So inflammation is the mediator between the dietary fiber and your mental state. As I mentioned on the previous slide, C-reactive protein and interleukin-6 are inflammatory markers, and studies have shown that there are parallel increases in both of these markers and the severity of depression. And there's also lower concentrations of adiponectin, which is the anti-inflammatory, and severity of depression. So just what I was talking about on the previous slide, they found links between these inflammatory markers and depression indices as well. And cytokines have been shown to induce depressive-like behaviors as well. This I went over. So it's not just depression that is found in the literature. So meta-analyses have shown schizophrenia and post-traumatic stress disorder are also both accompanied by activation of inflammatory pathways and cytokines. So it's been found with a lot of different mental illness. And coming back to the short-chain fatty acids that I mentioned, just wanted to go over a little bit of what was going on with the pathway there. So short-chain fatty acids change the pH in your intestine by releasing bicarbonate, and this changes the composition of your microbiome. This then will go, so basically dietary fibers changing the short-chain fatty acids and the production of endotoxins, which are the bacterial toxins. And inflammatory cytokines also increase reuptake and decrease synthesis of serotonin and dopamine, which decreases the availability. And if you think about someone who's taking an SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and then you're also pairing that with a diet that has low fiber, lots of inflammation, it's causing this increase in inflammatory cytokines, which is then kind of acting against the SSRI, which is trying to keep serotonin in the brain, and it's actually increasing reuptake. So it's kind of working against each other if you're not also having a great diet along with whatever medication you may be using for a condition. And back to the concept of the leaky gut again. So dietary fiber decreases the permeability of the intestinal membrane through the increased production of short-chain fatty acids. So basically making your gut more leaky. And this high intestinal permeability causes endotoxemia, which is those bacterial toxins getting out if you have a low fiber diet, and you end up with these pro-inflammatory cytokines, which causes increased inflammation in the brain. So that's just another pathway by which the dietary fiber can actually affect your leaky gut, and high fiber is going to make that less leaky, decrease permeability. This is a great simplified overview of some of the pathways I've mentioned briefly, but I just wanted to show a visual as well. And there's a lot of different ways that dietary fiber could be impacting depression, but these are just some of the ones that I touched on. So it can affect it both dependently and independently of inflammation. This is one of the independent pathways, so it could directly impact the synthesis of serotonin, tryptophan, and GABA, which is another neurotransmitter. And then it could also affect levels of inflammation through the increase in short-chain fatty acids, which changes the environment of the intestine and contributes to the leaky gut that I was talking about. This decrease in inflammation with high fiber could decrease the HPA axis activation, which is your stress response, and this in turn decreases the incidence and severity of your of the depression. So this doesn't even cover everything, I'm sure, but it was I thought a good visual to kind of see how many different ways dietary fiber could be acting, and I'm sure there's a lot that are still not even known. So there's so many benefits of high dietary fiber. So next I'm going to be discussing how proteins and amino acids are turned into neurotransmitters and some of the common foods that you might find these amino acids in. So the most common nutritional deficiencies seen in patients with mental disorders are of omega-3 fatty acids, B vitamins, minerals, and then amino acid precursors to neurotransmitters. And that's what I'm going to be discussing in the next couple slides. So tryptophan is essential for the synthesis of serotonin, which is the neurotransmitter that I mentioned, and it cannot be synthesized by our bodies, so it has to come from our diet. And tyrosine can be synthesized from phenylalanine to make dopamine and norepinephrine, but tyrosine itself isn't essential, but it relies on phenylalanine, which is essential. So both tryptophan and phenylalanine need to come from our diet in order to push these pathways forward and make these important neurotransmitters. Starting with tryptophan, this is the main amino acid used for synthesis of serotonin. Luckily, this can be found in a variety of foods. It also leads to the production of melatonin, which is the chemical in your brain that allows you to fall asleep at night. So it's really essential in your body. And coming back to the idea of, SSRIs, and if you're taking an SSRI, you're trying to keep more serotonin in your brain, and taking a tryptophan supplement or trying to get a lot of foods which are high in tryptophan, that's a great way to help that process. And even if you're not taking any medications, just a great way to improve your mood through increased synthesis of serotonin. And some of the foods that have tryptophan you can see here, so chicken, turkey, salmon, peanuts, bananas, whole grains like rice, eggs, oats, and then cheese. So quite a few options. Next, talking about phenylalanine. So this is the precursor to tyrosine, which is used to make dopamine. And you can see the pathway here. And this is another really important neurotransmitter, as I mentioned, with mood, cognition, all of that. So similar sort of foods as what was on the previous slide. It can be found in meat and dairy products, like cheese, eggs, nuts, and beans. So a huge range of things, but hopefully you can start to see some of the images that I use repeat, some of the foods come up again and again, and they're foods that have a lot of these components in them. So omega-3 and omega-6 are not amino acids, they're polyunsaturated fatty acids, but they're basically the really good kinds of fats, and they're super important. Omega-3 in particular is super important for brain health. So omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acid plays a key role in the inflammatory response through lipid, fat, mediators called prostaglandins and leukotrienes. And omega-3, which goes on to produce EPA and DHA, produces a lot of the chemicals required by the brain, and overall they have an anti-inflammatory effect. So these two kind of work together in a balance to both pro and anti-inflammatory, but both really important all over the body for your immune system, and omega-3 in particular for the brain. So as I discussed previously, inflammation plays a large role in depression and other psychiatric disorders. So omega-3 and 6 are really involved with this process also. And on the left, you can see a lot of the sources of these, like salmon is probably one of the most well-known, avocados, nuts, eggs, and then of course supplements if you're not able to get these in your diet that much. So focusing on omega-3, which is the main omega or unsaturated fatty acid that's important for brain functioning, these are essential fatty acids, so they cannot be synthesized by the body. They have to come from your diet. So that's why nutrition is really important here. The brain lipids basically make up your neuronal membranes. So all the neurons in your brain, the membranes around them, omega-3s make up a huge portion of those. And in particular, they make up 33% of the gray matter in your brain, which is a huge amount. And your brain has gray matter and white matter. Both are really important. They have different structures and functions, but both are really important to have. And omega-3s, you have to get from your diet, and they make up a third of this gray matter. So super important to try and get that through what you're eating. Higher plasma EPA, which is the product from omega-3, was associated with lower gray matter atrophy of the hippocampus and amygdala of participants 65 and older. So this was a study I found, and these are areas of the brain that are involved with memory formation and emotional response. And there was less atrophy over time, which, I mean, atrophy is going to occur as you age, but slowing that process down is important, and greater omega-3s in your diet slowed this process down. Studies also showed that higher EPA, which is the omega-3, was associated with lower cognitive decline, lower dementia risk, and then fewer depression symptoms in the elderly. So again, huge impact on not only the structure of your brain, but also how it's functioning, how you're able to respond to things, especially over time as you age. And the fatty acid composition of the brain is really unique. So there's high levels of the both the omega-6 fatty acid and also the omega-3 fatty acid DHA. And the main polyunsaturated fatty acid in your brain is DHA from omega-3s. So it's really neuroprotective, and it's basically able to shield your brain from deterioration and over time helping it remain as healthy as possible. The endogenous synthesis of EPA, DHA, and DPA, these are all the molecules that come from omega-3s and 6s. Endogenous synthesis is low, which just means that it relies on dietary sources in your blood. You need to get this from your nutrition, and unfortunately your brain isn't able to synthesize these itself. So similar to the essential amino acids I mentioned. It maintains levels in the brain by taking it up from your diet and from liver sources in the plasma. Omega-3 also has an impact on brain plasticity and neurogenesis, which is the formation of new neurons in the brain, and then plasticity is just the ability of it to change over time. So I know I went over a lot there, so I'll just quickly summarize some of the effects of omega-3 that are the most important, such as signal transmission within neurons through like neurotransmitters, the brain structure and mass, so kind of the gray matter and the neuronal membranes that I was talking about. Memory, focus, and attention, improving those, preventing your brain from shrinking or preventing brain atrophy over time as you age, and then lowering your risk of dementia. So huge number of really important effects with omega-3. It's very well studied. It's known to have really direct effects on a variety of things in your brain. So it's super important. And I want to mention the omega-6, omega-3 ratio, because this is important as I talk about, one is pro-inflammatory, one is anti-inflammatory. So it's this balance between the two. And ideally, we want that to be as close as 1-to-1 ratio. So getting as many omega-6s as we do omega-3s to maintain that balance in our immune system. But unfortunately, the average modern diet has led most people on average to be closer to 16-to-1, which means you have way more omega-6, which is pro-inflammatory, than omega-3s, which is anti-inflammatory. And that's just contributing to this chronic systemic inflammation that a lot of people suffer from. And because it's a ratio, it doesn't mean that you have to eat way, way, way more omega-3s. It's just about balancing the two and understanding the ratio in certain foods. So different oils have different ratios. And if you look at this first chart, you can see that the canola oil has a omega-6 to 3 ratio of 2.2, which is much better than a lot of the other commonly used oils. So olive oil is really great for you, but unfortunately it doesn't have a lot of polyunsaturated fatty acids. But if you look at something like corn oil, it has way more omega-6 than 3, versus flaxseed oil, which is great, or canola oil, which tends to be like available at most places. It's a lot more affordable than flaxseed oil. So if you can look out for that at the store and try to use that in cooking and dressings and all that, that'll definitely help out with the ratio. And then salmon fat, you can see on the bottom, it has the lowest ratio of 0.1. So that's why most people associate these fatty acids with eating salmon and other fish, is because salmon has such a great number of omega-3s. And then in terms of nuts, flaxseed, chia seed, and walnuts have the lowest ratio. And you can see some of the other nuts which have incredibly high amounts of omega-6. So something like pistachios has way more omega-6 than 3s. So if you can get walnuts in your diet, or chia seeds and flax seeds, that's a really great way to balance that ratio out. And omega-6 is really important for your body, but because it's so common in so many foods, most people have plenty of omega-6 in their diet, and it's the omega-3s that's really lacking, and it's the omega-3s that are so important for your brain. So that's something that you definitely need to keep in mind going forward when shopping, and particularly through that oil consumption. So I'm going to be discussing the 2 vitamins that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, B9 and B12. So starting with B9, which is folate. Study participants with depression have been found to have blood folate levels on average that are 25% lower than healthy controls. And folate deficiency is associated with low levels of serotonin metabolite, which is a chemical necessary to synthesize serotonin. And it's also used to convert a chemical called homocysteine to methionine, which is important for DNA synthesis and other pathways in the brain. Homocysteine is an amino acid that's related to neurodegenerative disease, and high levels can lead to brain damage and cognitive decline. So methionine prevents the accumulation of this in the brain. Really important. I thought this was really interesting that poor outcome with antidepressant therapy could come about if you have a folate deficiency. So supplementing with 500 micrograms of folic acid was shown to enhance the effectiveness of medication. So it's a great way to have a synergistic effect and work together with any medications someone might be taking for depression in particular. And folate, you can see on the right, mostly found in green leafy vegetables, avocados, asparagus, lentils, beans, peas, and oranges. Next, talking about vitamin B12. So again, studies have shown that participants with vitamin B12 deficiencies are more likely to have depressive symptoms. And it's the same pathway as folate. So it's necessary for synthesis of methionine, which is essential for myelin and neurotransmitters and prevents the buildup of homocysteine as well. So you can see B12 and B9 folic acid are used in this pathway in order to clear homocysteine and push it into methionine so it doesn't reach toxic levels. And that's why they're both so important for brain health. It's used to synthesize myelin, which is the coating around neurons, helps them work more efficiently and stay protected. And a deficiency causes neurologic and psychiatric problems. And that's something that's well studied in the literature as well. So brain shrinking can be accelerated And this is likely due to the increasing homocysteine if you have a deficiency in B12. So that's important. B12 is mostly from animal food sources such as meat, dairy, eggs, and fish. And you should probably take a supplement if you're not getting these in your diet, if you're vegan or vegetarian and avoiding these foods. It can also be found in some fortified cereals, so you might see on the box that it has B12 in it. And trials have shown that supplementation with folic acid or vitamin B12 decrease depression symptoms. So it's something that's been very well studied. Briefly touching on carbohydrates, so these cause a release of insulin, which helps tryptophan enter the brain, which is really important to synthesize serotonin. And serotonin and tryptophan production is triggered by high carb foods. But it's important to note that it's not just about getting carbohydrates, it's about the quality of the carbohydrates, and glycemic index is something you may have heard of, like high GI, low GI foods. But it's a ranking of carbohydrates based on their effect on blood glucose levels. So low GI foods such as fruit, veg, whole grains are more likely to provide moderate and lasting effects on your brain chemistry, as well as your mood and energy, versus high GI foods, which have an immediate but temporary relief. And you can see on the chart on the right, the high GI foods show this peak in blood sugar that then decreases rapidly, whereas the low GI, you have an increase in blood sugar, but then it stays consistent over time, and you won't notice the such a up and down with your mood and your energy. And there was a study with middle-aged healthy women that found that a high GI diet was associated with higher levels of C-reactive protein, which was that inflammatory marker I mentioned. So again, it all comes back to the inflammation, and it's something that comes up again and again with a variety of different topics, but something to keep in mind throughout. And then the diet, the only diet I really wanted to talk about was the Mediterranean diet, because this is well known to have a variety of benefits, particularly on brain health, and it's very well studied as well. But the Mediterranean diet is a plant-based diet high in fruits and vegetables, minimally processed foods, and olive oil is primarily the main source of added fat. It has a focus on whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds, and there's a moderate amount of dairy products, a low to moderate amount of fish and poultry, and then a low amount of red meat. So the chart on the right really shows like that huge proportion that is made up of fruit and veg and whole grain, and that's like the most important part of the Mediterranean diet pyramid. And then adding those other things, primarily fish and seafood as that first source of meat, and then poultry above that, eggs, cheese, yogurt. So some of the health benefits of the Mediterranean diet are related to the anti-inflammatory and antioxidative properties. So there's lower levels of inflammatory markers, higher levels of adiponectin, which is an insulin sensitizing hormone, and it's anti-inflammatory, and it also protects from oxidative stress. And many studies have shown an association between the Mediterranean diet and lower levels of cognitive decline. So there was a systematic review that combined 41 studies showing that the Mediterranean diet induced a protective effect against depression. Sorry. Okay. So the study that looked at a Mediterranean-style diet was called the SMILES trial, and they had a ModiMed diet intervention, which was based on the Mediterranean diet, and it included whole grains, vegetables, fruits, legumes, and reduced sweets and refined foods, processed foods, sugary drinks. The participants had to have experienced a major depressive episode in their life, and they had to have had a baseline diet that was rated as being poor quality. So they were trying to improve their diet through this intervention. The diet intervention group showed significantly greater improvement in the depression rating scale compared to a social support group and control group, and this was independent of other factors. Particularly, I thought it was interesting that it was independent of weight change. So again, coming back to this focus on diet quality and diet quality improvement instead of just your body composition and how much you weigh. And this was a figure from the study just showing here the diet intervention. You can see that that depression rating scale has gone down even more than the social support group and more than the control group, or just compared with baseline, sorry. So comparing what it was at the beginning versus what it was at the end. So I'm just going to finish up with some of the food swaps that I thought were important to mention. So what I want to focus on typically when I'm grocery shopping is swapping refined grains for whole grains. That's because of the fiber that comes with it, added fiber, as well as having a lower glycemic index, which I mentioned. So most carbohydrates have a whole meal counterpart. For example, whole wheat bread, whole wheat pasta. Other whole grains include barley, farro, quinoa. There's a huge range of them, depending on what you have access to. And another great source of carbohydrates are legumes. So lentils and beans, you may have seen them come up a lot in different slides throughout my presentation. They have a lot of really great components of them, as well as nutrients. They're great food. They're really shelf stable. They're cheap. So a box of lentils will last way longer than a box of pasta because they're so fiber dense that they absorb tons of water. So even though it may not look like a lot in a box that you get, they actually expand so much when you cook them, and they're way more filling than white pasta, white bread. And then in terms of cereal, it can be really confusing to just look at the outside of the box because they all advertise various things and can be a bit overwhelming. So the best thing to do is to just look at the nutrition label, and the main thing I look at to compare cereals is the sugar content. So you're trying to get less than probably like 10 grams of sugar per serving, and you want to look at the serving to see how large that is. If you're comparing 1 cup versus a quarter cup, you need to keep that in mind. And also seeing that they have whole grain. So like Cheerios is made out of whole grain oats, which is really good. But even some whole grain cereals might have way more sugar content than something, even though they're seemingly healthy foods. So that's something to look at definitely as you're choosing. And then in terms of snacks, again, an emphasis on refined, swapping it out for whole foods. And these are some snack ideas that provide beneficial nutrients or are more filling than a bag of potato chips. So mixed nuts, eggs, dried fruit, as long as you check to see it doesn't have a whole lot of added sugar to it. Rice cakes tend to be 100% whole grain rice, which is great. And you can put things on them. They come in a variety of flavors. They're really good. Oats are really good for you. String cheese is a good high protein snack. Hummus with carrots or chips, because that's chickpeas. And then popcorn is something I do a lot. If you buy the bags of just corn kernels and you pop them yourself, you can just do it in a pot in the microwave. And you end up with way more popcorn than you would per like the amount that you spend on the bag of kernels versus buying bags of pre-popped popcorn. So that's something that I think is a great idea. Or if you just look for pre-popped popcorn that just has like olive oil or something, not all the bunch of flavors and all that. So popcorn's a really good snack. And plain corn chips with salsa is another good one. Bananas, and plain yogurt. So just making sure if you're buying yogurt to, again, look at the sugar content, because often that's something that's really high in sugar, even when you don't necessarily expect it, and it might label itself as being healthy. But you just want plain yogurt that then you can add your own fruit to make sure it's natural sugars and you can control how much you're putting on it. And hopefully you can recognize some of these foods from previous slides that came up a lot with different nutrients I talked about, particularly eggs, nuts, all really great. And then finishing up, just wanted to briefly touch on frozen food. It's a great alternative to fresh produce, and I know that not everyone has access to fresh produce all the time, and it's expensive, and it can be really tough to find and keep. So frozen foods actually retain the same nutrients as they had at the time of freezing. And some studies have shown that frozen fruits and vegetables have higher levels of certain vitamins and antioxidants than their refrigerated counterpart, just because they're frozen at the time that they're picked. And then they don't have to deal with the transit time getting to your fridge, sitting in your fridge. So they actually can sometimes be better than foods that you're buying, particularly if it's been a while since they've been picked fresh. And when picking frozen foods, you want to try and stick to individual food items rather than pre-prepared meals for nutritional and economical benefits. Something like a prepared meal is probably going to have, I mean, it's very processed, so they've added a lot of things to allow it to be a packaged meal and convenient in that way. But if you buy, say, a packet of frozen salmon fillets and then a pack of frozen mixed vegetables, you can actually get way more meals out of it for a lower price than you would if you were buying every meal as like a prepackaged meal all made together, because you're paying for that convenience. So if you can put those things together yourself, it's really healthy. It will last a long time, particularly with fish, because that's something you have to eat pretty soon after buying it if you buy it fresh. So it's a great way to just have that in your freezer. It's easy, put it in the oven, and will last a lot longer. And then as well, like if you have something like a frozen waffle versus a frozen mixed berries that you can just put on some low sugar yogurt for breakfast, that's another really great snack. Frozen berries are great, particularly because berries are quite expensive and they don't last for a huge amount of time. But mixed berries, you can get quite a lot for not a huge amount. And these are some of the resources that I use throughout my presentation, which I reference throughout. And if anyone has any questions, we can take them now. Thank you so much for everyone who came and attended, and I hope you learned something about nutrition along the way.
Okay. Well, Rebecca, we have quite a few questions that have been populating the question and answer box. So we're going to start with some of the questions that came in early on. And what we had was, okay, so we have Jessica who asked about a fiber question, and she wanted to know about fiber. It's the fiber diet usually fills you up quicker. So I just simply answered her, yes, very, very usually, but it's a question Rebecca will answer, because in relation to what we're talking about, there might be an answer that is a little bit more fulfilling here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the fiber filling you up kind of relates back to that high GI, low GI concept. And if you're getting foods that are higher in fiber, they tend to be low GI, which is going to make you feel fuller for longer and have less of that spike in blood sugar as well. So the fiber actually slows the release of sugar into the bloodstream, and that's why particularly that soluble fiber has such a great impact on inflammation, blood sugar, cholesterol. So it's kind of acting with the foods that you're ingesting to keep you full for longer and not letting your body absorb it as fast. So it definitely has an impact on that.
Thank you for that. So another question, another fiber question, how much fiber should be taken a day? And I believe that some of that came in that answer that you've been giving, you just gave. And how can you say that you are taking enough or need to supplement? How do you know that? And what are the signs that someone is lacking fiber in a diet?
Okay, lots to unpack. I think, and I think the amount of fiber that's recommended for people is 40, let me just check this. I think it's 40 grams a day. But a lot of people in the nutrition world, 25 to 30. So should be from your food. But a lot of people in the nutrition world think you should be getting more, and something closer to 40. But again, it's sort of a process of getting as much as you can. You can get too much fiber, but most people are lacking fiber in their diet. So I don't think you have to worry particularly about overdoing it. It's most people's the issue is getting enough. And you want the majority of those to be coming from your food and not from supplements. So you can take fiber supplements, but it's not the same as having it within your food, because that's actually going to be affecting the food as it moves through your digestive tract. So definitely something that you can look at the fiber on nutrition labels, or you can just Google fiber in, different fiber in an apple and do it that way. But if you are making sure that most of your food in the day is coming from whole foods and you're choosing whole grains instead of refined grains, that's going to have a huge impact on your fiber intake, and having plenty of servings of fruit and vegetables throughout the day. But again, it's most people need more, so I wouldn't necessarily worry about having too much. But in terms of knowing if you're fiber deficient or if you have too much, I think I'm not totally certain on that because it has so many effects all over the body. It's kind of hard with a lot of nutrition stuff to pinpoint exactly what is the main issue. But if it's something that you change in your diet and you notice improvements, or you notice that things are getting worse, that's kind of the best way to do it with a lot of nutrition, is to do it, see how you feel. If you feel better, like, that's great, keep going, try and get more.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you. So another question came, and it is, how is ghee, highly clarified butter, and coconut oil ranked in omega-6 to omega-3 ratio?
Ghee, I'm not sure. Coconut oil, I think, is mostly saturated fats. Let me just see. Yeah, so coconut oil is really high in saturated fats, and omega-3 and 6s are polyunsaturated fatty acids. Coconut oil has other benefits. There's still research being done on how coconut oil affects the brain. And it's sort of, I don't think it's completely decided yet exactly what the impact is, but in terms of omega-3s and 6s, I don't think that's something that you would get from coconut oil. And I think ghee might be the same, because I think it's also saturated fat. But those are, I didn't go into saturated fats that much, but there have been some benefits seen with coconut oil in particular, which I'm not super positive on, but not the source of omega-3s and 6s. That's more, the canola oil I talked about, fish oils, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And would you just say, and I'm just going to ask you this, if it's possible, that some of these things that may not be known yet, and as the research is going on, are something that people can really just keep following, which would really be a good idea to maintain health, that they do. And maybe at the end of all this, you can just brainstorm a little bit as far as a good resource for people. So yeah. Another question came in, and it's about the oils that somebody had missed, the best oil that balances the omega-6 and omega-3. If we could just mention that again.
Yeah, so flaxseed oil is probably the best, or fish oil, like from salmon. But canola oil is also good, and it's like flaxseed oil, I think, is pretty expensive. So canola oil is also a pretty good one.
Got it.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. So somebody has asked, would you like to comment on keto diet or intermittent fasting, the effect that would have on a person with a mental illness?
Yeah, so
it's 8 o'clock.
Ketogenic diets, I know, are really well studied in terms of different mental illness, and I know they have a really great effect on, I think, seizure disorders and other measures of cognitive decline with elderly participants. And so that one is a diet that is it's great for specific conditions. I wouldn't recommend the ketogenic diet for just anyone who wants to do it, but it has been shown to have some benefits. So that's something that, if you're interested, you should definitely look up the research on it and do some reading, because that's kind of a tricky one. Like, it's not fully established in terms of applying it to everyone, and it's still something that's being studied, but it does have some really beneficial effects with specific conditions, I will say. And then intermittent fasting as well does have really great research behind it, and has been shown to improve a lot of your metabolic response, glycemic response, all of that. So from what I understand from the research, is that the longest you can go between when you eat at night and when you eat the next day, the better. So if you can go 13 hours, that's great. If you can go 16 hours, that's even better. but trying to eat as many hours as possible before you try to sleep, because glucose actually, or insulin release from glucose interferes with melatonin, which is going to interfere with how you sleep. So that's something that has an effect. But intermittent fasting is a really great, I guess I'm talking more about time restricted feeding, which is like increasing that duration between meals, but intermittent fasting as well, which is a lot more extreme, has also been shown to have good effects. But definitely, I mean, nutrition, it's not an all or nothing science, and any little change that you can make in the right direction is going to be beneficial. So it's not about doing the most and skipping a whole day of eating and on and off again. It's more about like consistency and whatever works with you in your schedule, and what will be a lasting change for you. Even if it's small, it's going to be better if you can do it over time than something big that you can only sustain for, you know, a couple of weeks or a month.
Great. And that answer was so inclusive of so many things as far as sleep hygiene as well. So it just goes on and on. So another question here is, are there unhealthy herbs and spices?
I haven't heard of any, no. I think herbs and spices are great. Maybe for certain people, if you have some sort of allergy or intolerance, I don't know, I haven't heard of that. But I think herbs and spices are a great way to make your foods taste better. They have all sorts of nutrients in them themselves. Yeah, so I think all good, but I haven't heard anything different, so I could be missing something.
Continual research. I have to bring you back again after another year. Okay, so how about vitamin D? Someone has asked. I feel like everyone is telling me to use vitamin D.
Yeah, vitamin D is really important for calcium absorption in your body. So if you don't have enough vitamin D, you're not going to have enough calcium levels, which is really important for bone density, especially if you're over 65. So a lot of people don't have enough vitamin D in their diets. And that's something that is great to get checked if you have routine blood work or the next time you see your primary care physician, because people tend to be low. And that's something that you can easily supplement with, or I think it's in a bunch of different foods like eggs and I think vegetables. Yeah, I have to look that one up. But it's true, a lot of people are lower than optimal levels. And if you can get a supplement, that's worth doing.
Okay. And we go on. We've got quite a few questions, and I'm hoping that we do get to all of these. So the next one is going to be heartburn. We're going to go to heartburn. Does this affect depression, and which foods might help?
I don't know how heartburn affects depression. That's interesting. I would have to do some research into that. But in terms of what foods help, I know that a lot of people, it's dairy products that tend to cause heartburn. And some people are just more sensitive than other people. But I haven't done a whole lot of research into that, so I'm not totally sure on that one.
Okay. Well,
interesting.
I mean, I think there are some questions here that start to probe into like the bigger question of all the products that are out there that could affect the way we, not just what we're eating and drinking, but how they're affecting our gut, how they're affecting various parts of our body. And then again, of course, directly affecting our brain. So we go to coffee. Should caffeine be eliminated or controlled?
Caffeine, as far as I'm aware, is totally fine as long as you're under, I think, 400 milligrams per day. So that's like 4 espresso shots of coffee. So if you're having a daily coffee, it's great, unless it can be pretty tough on some people's stomachs. So if you're having it first thing in the morning and it's black and it's really high in acid, so some people can have like acid reflux from coffee. So a lot of people end up cutting it out if they're experiencing that, because it's just, they can't tolerate it well. So definitely just a personal thing. In terms of the effect on your brain, it's, not shown to have any negative consequences over time. And it's more just a personal thing of how you feel with it. And if you need to have it after food or add milk to it, something like that. But yeah, caffeine is definitely well studied and well established to be pretty safe, as long as you're not having, 10 cups a day.
Yeah. So right about now, we see some of the longest lines on at Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts. So I would imagine that people are really taking on a lot of coffee. It's a way to get out. It's a road trip these days. So anyway, we have a question about cod liver oil or fish oil tablets, and is the difference important
Between cod liver oil and
cod
fish?
liver or fish oil?
I don't know about that one. My assumption would be no, because I think both are designed to give you supplements of omega-3s, and but I'm sure if you Googled that, they might be able to give you more specifics of the exact one, but I'm pretty sure both are high in omega-3s, which is what you need to be getting a lot of. So I think both are great.
And almond milk, the almond milk beneficial in any way to what has been discussed already today, because it's nuts, and so it goes to, how does that work?
I think like nut milk and oat milk, I don't think they have, like, they're mostly water, I think. So if you want to get the benefits I'm talking about from nuts, then it's best just to eat the nuts. And the amount you're going to get in the milk is not going to, I don't think you're going to see many benefits from that. So it's great if you're sensitive to dairy or you just like are not eating animal products. Those milks are great substitutes, but I wouldn't say they're a good substitute for the nut itself. Like, you should still be getting plenty of mixed nuts in your diets if you can, for sure.
Okay. And more food. So how about the Greek yogurts? Are they good for depression?
Greek yogurt is great. I would say, yogurt has probiotics in it, which just means it has the bacteria living in it that colonize your gut. So that's why people say, if you eat yogurt, that's like a probiotic. And it's really good for your digestion and all that. So it definitely has an impact on depression through all those mechanisms I'm talking about. Like, if you're colonizing your gut with more beneficial bacteria through eating yogurt, that's going to help with all the inflammatory processes that I mentioned, because your gut bacteria play a role in all of that. So definitely indirectly it helps, yeah. And probiotics can be really expensive in the supplement form. So yogurt is a really great way to get those in your diet without having to spend a lot of extra money. Okay.
So we've got a few more questions and we're getting close to time. We've got about a minute left for Q&A. And we've got, of course, more questions about the omega-3 and 6 and the supplements. So I think that some of that actually has been covered. So we're going to, I'm going to ask this question. Somebody has asked, can a depressed person develop diabetes quicker than a non-depressed person?
I definitely think all those pathways are involved with each other, and it's not necessarily one causing the other, but it's kind of a back and forth thing, and it's a two-way street. So someone who has diabetes might develop depression or like at a greater severity than someone without diabetes, just because the blood sugar plays a role, of course, and people with type 2 diabetes as well tend to have low-grade chronic inflammation, so that plays a role in depression as well. So they're all related processes. It is hard to imply like causation and see exactly what is causing the other, but definitely a possibility, yeah.
So we're really at time, but I just want to put this out there for you, because this could be just a simple answer about research. That is there any research on high sugar intake and how it affects mental health? So if it's out there and people can find that, how can they go about that?
Yeah, there definitely is a lot of research on sugar and mental health. I mean, all the macronutrients and the micronutrients have been studied. So it's just kind of, I mean, it does take a while to go through the studies and read them, but if you go to PubMed, PubMed, that is the main research site for publications. So when anything comes out in a publication, it'll be put on the PubMed website, which is through the NIH. And that's how I find all my studies. It can be tough to go through them all and read them, but often there are systematic like reviews, which basically take a whole bunch of studies and they put them together and they discuss like the main trends they found from them. So they might look at all the sugar and depression studies, and then they come up with a conclusion about what they all found. And those are great because you don't have to go through and look through all the different ones, and it just kind of synthesizes it all for you. So looking for systematic reviews is a really great way to do it.
Okay. Well, right about now, we have to wrap up the Q&A, the live Q&A, but please, we want everyone to know that they can also ask questions in the Hearts and Minds survey. So we will try to get answers to as many of the questions as possible. And if there are questions that that generate a wider conversation, then they could write that they're interested in future topics. And I really think that that would be pretty fabulous to open this conversation about what is really happening in the brain and how the brain-body connection is. We cannot separate that out. So, Rebecca, I just want to tell you this was absolutely wonderful having this time with you. It's been invaluable, and I truly appreciate it. Our attendees have been amazing. Their questions have been fabulous, and they are loving every minute of this. So please know we haven't gotten to things like what is your favorite food swap, but I want people to know that we are reading every one of them, and the recommendation about papaya tablets, and everybody has tried to share something out here. So I appreciate it. Get those questions on the survey and ask for another, because we do really love to bring this information and it makes us all think. So again, Rebecca, everybody has really enjoyed this. They have so appreciated and said over and over, thank you very much for this informative and enlightening webinar. It was great. Somebody has said to the future Dr. Howard. So we'll all be looking for that. And you've got a very full practice already before it's begun. So we're going to ask if the PowerPoint, we can shut that screen off so that we can bring up the NAMI New Jersey screen. And Rebecca, thank you again. And I'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, Elena, and thank you for.
You're very welcome. Thank you. It was an absolute pleasure. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to now go to share the NAMI New Jersey website with everyone. The NAMI New Jersey website is up, and our homepage, of course, many of you have seen our homepage. We're hoping you have. And before we close the webinar, I'd like to share with all of you our online resources and information from the NAMI New Jersey website. And from our front page, if all of you would go to Getting Involved, which is right here, you can become a member of NAMI New Jersey, and you'll find out all the information you need to there. So please take a look at it. There are some wonderful things on this website. There are so many various places that you could go and investigate and learn so much about what is going on. As you can see, the webinars are countless. There are so many of them. This upcoming one you registered for, there are others coming up very soon. And also, if you, that being said, all of the programs are free. On our front page, you can also go to the COVID website. NAMI New Jersey has created a site, and here it is. It's the COVID-19 support and resources. So the COVID-19 is up. It's there are a lot of resources for folks during this time where we know everybody is searching for additional services or whatever else they may need. You'll find where statewide online support groups are, our affiliate support groups. So remember, many of you may be from various affiliates from across the state. If you're not, your county affiliates are available for you, and you can search that out and find out what they have available. We do run NAMI Connection, NAMI Family Support meetings. There are so many meetings run in the state of New Jersey right now. We're really, we've been pretty much at the forefront of this from day one. So you'll be able to access all of our services, multicultural programs, the signature programs, as well as webinars as this one. And it would be a shame to miss any of them, because every single one of them has really been a tremendous hit. It has really provided so much information for everyone. So please feel free to reach out to NAMI New Jersey for any support you will need. Remember, this is going to be recorded. The webinars are, and you can tap into that later on to review it, and the presentation will be online. So I know there were some very, very informative slides that you will probably want to review and take a look at. So this has been a wonderful experience, and I appreciate very much that all of you would come to a Hearts and Minds presentation, a NAMI New Jersey Hearts and Minds presentation. So thank you again for sharing this time with us. And if you could just please remember to complete this survey, because it's tremendously helpful that we can incorporate your feedback into future webinars. We'll know what you want to see and what you want to hear. So this concludes our webinar, and thank you all again so much. It has been a pleasure reaching all of you. Good night.